about what your thoughts were from the SPA and the pricing conversation we had on Thursday. Ahas, questions, pros, cons. Were you excited by it? Were you horrified by it? Boy, this might be a long 2 hours.
I'll jump in, Rick.
Margaret.
I liked that it focuses on the data. And so I just appreciate that takes some of the emotion out of it, because you don't have to be the bad guy if you're talking about, a price that they don't maybe isn't what they had in mind. It's just all numbers. It's very factual.
Yeah, and so Margaret said something really important. I'll underline what she said. She said it takes some of the emotion out of it. I'm going to tell you, I think it takes almost all of the emotion out of it, right? Because it allows you to simply base your conversation on fact and objectivity. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be human, right? And yet it's not about you presenting a number, right? And that's the most important part of, I think, this entire conversation, is that for so long, real estate agents were saddled with the responsibility, or at least the seeming responsibility, of meeting with a seller and dumping this number from them. And this whole process alleviates you from that responsibility. Instead, it bestows a different responsibility on you. It bestows the responsibility of you being really clear about what objective data you're bringing to the table. And if you go back to the job description that I gave you, right, it calls upon you to interpret that data so that the client can make the best business decision possible. And yet it is the client making that decision. Over and over and over again, the client is going to position and price their own property based on the data that you bring to the table. I cannot underline enough the importance of that. What questions, what else did you learn? What other questions do you have?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hey, Jerome.
Hey. So the question I have is, I was looking at what Bogdan had shared with his menu of service offerings. And I compared that with some stuff that I had received when I was selling property in Florida as the seller, not as an agent. And what was interesting to me is that he started at a certain level and went down from there. And then, his mid portion was at, I think it was 5.5% or something. Is there a specific ceiling or floor where that can be? And do we also have the ability to decide when we put the listing to the market how we want the split to be, or is it always 50-50 and it's always capped at 6%?
So great question. So I'll answer it a couple of different ways. The first way I'll answer that is there's no law that exists that says you have to list at a certain level. So there really is no floor. And there's no law that exists that says you can't list beyond 6%. Right? I mean, depending on what part of the country you're in, 7 is the norm. There are parts of the country where certain properties, land deals in the Midwest, are typically more like 8 or 10%, right? So there's nothing that says that the number has to be 5 or it has to be 6 or it has to be in between. The second way I'll answer that is from a brokerage perspective. There are a lot of brokerages that have policies in place that say if you choose to list below 5%, when the property closes and the money gets split between you and the brokerage, they'll do the calculation as if it was 5%, even though you chose something. So let's say you choose 4.5%, right? And you put out 2.5 and you take 2 on your side. Well, there are a lot of brokerages that below a certain number, and that number is typically 5%, instead of 2.5%, you earned 2. They'll calculate your split as if you earned the full 2.5. even though so they calculate their portion off of a higher number that doesn't really exist. So in other words, they have this rule that says you really couldn't or shouldn't list below 5%. And if you do, you get to eat that. We're not eating that. That is not the way our brokerage works, right? And the main reason our brokerage doesn't work that way is because that's not how I worked when I was a listing agent. And when you're in a position of making the rules that I decided that we were going to live by were not rules that I had to live by as a listing agent. When I started my career at Century 21, I was constantly in trouble with the broker, because I decided that I was going to go and offer myself out at 4.5% to get as many signs as I possibly could. Right? That was just a choice that I made. And nobody liked that idea. Now I was listing up a storm, especially for a brand new agent. I was listing like crazy, but nobody seemed to want to say, hey, good job on the listings. Instead, it was always, they're not there. The zip code is wrong. They're not in town, and you're not listing at least at 5%. So that's a long way of saying, in our brokerage, we support your decisions. I am more than happy to help you hold your commissions as high as possible. It was always something I was good at as a listing agent. I think it's something I'm still good at as a real estate coach, to help you and guide you to have proper conversations and present yourself in such a way that commissions don't have to necessarily be given away. And at the same time, we support whatever your decision is. So if your decision is to list for less, if you're offering a discount for whatever reason because you believe that's the best path for your business, we support that. You don't have to come back and ask me the question. That was how it was at Century 21. I was supposed to go back and ask the broker. Can you imagine sitting with a seller and having a conversation and saying, you know what, if you could just hold on 1 second, I have to go ask my father if I'm allowed to do this. Oh my goodness. I thought that is for the birds. So those are two of the three ways I was going to answer that, Jerome. What was the third? Oh, and the third way I was going to answer that was, sometimes market conditions can affect things, right? There are more people who are coming to me nowadays. Frankly, I've seen more 4.75s in the last 3 or 4 months than I have kind of ever, simply because with listing inventory being at such a premium, right? So scarce. Sellers are putting more pressure on more agents on commissions because they know they can.
Yeah.
So is that something that's real? Yes, absolutely. Are there ways to objection handle some of that? Certainly. And at some point, you may have to make a decision as to whether or not, if your objection handling doesn't move you forward, if you're not able to secure something at a higher commission, does it make sense to do it at a lower commission? Does that answer some of or all of what you were asking, Jerome?
It answered the first part. The second part, it didn't. And just for clarity, I was asking if we could push the number higher rather than lower.
Yeah.
But the second part of the question, Margaret was starting to answer with me on chat, which is just, how do we split between the listing side and the buyer side? Yeah.
So the question, you must be doing private chat because I'm not privy to the conversation. I understand how that's going to work. Okay. I see where I rate. So here's my question. How many other private chats are going on while I'm sitting here my heart out to you? You just let me know when it's no longer necessary for me to be here, and I'll go home and have dinner earlier. No, I'm just yanking your chain. So
what about for dual
I
agents?
just didn't want to interrupt you, Rick.
So I know, and I appreciate that. So let me finish answering this question, Mara, and I'll come
Okay.
to the question. So from a split perspective, you and the seller ultimately get to determine how the split happens, right? And I say you and the seller because you can make those calls. However, the seller has to know what the call is, right? And typically the way I handled the seller knowing what that call was is by filling out the data input sheets, which has a little blank on it that says BAC, right? Because ultimately when you fill out the data input sheets, when you take a new listing, the seller is supposed to sign that. Some of you don't fill out the data input sheets, and instead you'll input it directly into the MLS, and then you'll print out a full listing input sheet, which has all the fields showing anyway, and have the seller sign that. At some point, the seller has to sign a piece of paper that says, yes, all this data that you're showing me is correct, right? They need to look it over before it actually goes live on the MLS. So you can do it either way. But in that document, whether you're filling out the data input sheets prior to putting it in the MLS, or putting it in the MLS and then printing it out and having them sign it before you actually publish the listing, it shows what you're offering out. So the seller knows that they're paying you 6% and BAC on the MLS says 2.5. I'm not saying you have to have a specific summit about what you offer out, right? Because that's also oftentimes a question. Do we have to sit and have this big long conversation with the seller? No. However, they do have to know about it. And again, you can accomplish that by having them sign the data input sheets. And if they do ask about it, be prepared for a defense on why you may choose to hold more. I'll give you that in just a second. There is no actual rule, Jerome, that says you have to offer a 50-50 split.
Okay.
I was a 6% listing agent for most of my time in the field, and I most of the time offered out 2.5%. So it was 2.5 out to the buyer and 3.5 for me. Part of how if I was challenged or questioned by the seller on that, I would just tell them a story. I don't know if you've noticed, but I solve a lot of my issues when people ask questions by telling a story, because people understand stories a little bit better. And so my story was, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I actually do that on purpose. And I do that on purpose because I have had scenarios in the past where the buyers and the sellers ultimately just get to an impasse, or something comes up that the sellers think is ridiculous, but the buyers are holding firm on it. And when I keep more of the money on my side versus offering more money out to the buyer's agent, I get to make decisions in those scenarios as to whether or not I will choose to assist in getting that transaction to the closing table with the extra funds that I kept on my side. Please note, it is always my choice, and I will always make a choice based on the facts that are presented to me, right? And yet that's a reason why me keeping more on my side actually is to your benefit. It's going to cost you 6% either way. You might as well just give me the thumbs up if there's a question around it, to hold more on my side just in case.
Okay.
Does that help?
That does. Thank you. And you're very anecdotal. Appreciate that.
You're quite welcome. At least I think. I hope that's helpful, right? But the idea is, again, I found, especially working with sellers, the yes or no answers oftentimes didn't help them understand. And so when you give them a story, when you give them a for instance, and it's a for instance that helps them see the benefit to them of the path you're suggesting they go down, or we go down together, it's just an easier yes. Because here's the thing, who's not going to say, oh, I get it, to me saying, I want to keep more on my side just in case it's required to get the deal closed? Right now, oftentimes I have people say, well, why would you say that? Because then they're just going to negotiate knowing you're going to give up your commission. I will tell you that is not what I have found. Like almost never that has come up that way. Instead, as I said, I position it from the perspective of I'd rather be more in control of more of the funds just in case. I didn't say, hey, just stop 10 grand short and I'll kick in my extra 1%. Because to me, it wasn't an extra 1%. My fee for the services that I provided when I got paid in full was 3.5%. You all can decide whatever your fee is, but my fee was 3.5%. And sometimes I worked for less. Right? And I just built a value proposition around 3.5%. The only time I wouldn't do an uneven split is if I thought that it somehow was a disservice to the seller. Now, sometimes arguments are made that offering more to a buyer's agent is more of a service to the seller because the property will get more attention. I can tell you in 21 and a half years, I have not noticed that to be the motivator for most buyer's agents. Now, it's one thing if you're offering them 1% versus 2.5%, but 2.5% versus 3%, the buyers call the shots anyway. The buyers have more information available to them today than they ever have before. So it's not like agents can hide properties. The buyer sees them online, says, I want to see that one. It doesn't matter what the offering out is. So I have not noticed that to be a detriment to the seller. What else? Mara, you had a question.
Yeah, no, I was wondering when you do dual agency, everyone was telling me the going rate is 4%, but then I hear all different things. People say try to get 5%. You can even ask for 6%, but for the most part, I hear it's a 4% split. Is that true?
So great question. I can answer, not in my world. So the real answer is, again, you get to make choices around that. Do I see agents taking listings for 5, 5.5%, 6%? Yes. Do I see them offering a discount if they themselves are on both sides of the transaction? Yes, I do. Do I think that's a good idea? I don't know. I don't know that I get to have an opinion about that, right? But here's what I know. If you're on both sides of the transaction, you don't do less work, you do more.
Right.
So why that should be worth less is kind of beyond me. I'll tell you the script that I use with sellers when they would ask me for that is, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want to kind of put this in perspective. It sounds to me like you are purposefully creating a disincentive for me to go and actually personally locate your buyer. Am I hearing that correctly? Because that's what they're doing, right? They are creating on paper a disincentive for me to go out and find the buyer myself. Why would we do that? Right? So I will tell you that sometimes agents do it because they'd rather say yes to that and feel like they've given something than hold firm on their 5 or 5.5 or 6%, right? And so strategically, if that's why it's being done, I guess I sort of understand that. I just think that it sounds like a great plan until the buyer shows up at your open house, and now you are on both sides, and now you're thinking, oh crap, well now I'm like working for nothing, right? Because here's what I want you to remember. Your time is valuable. And so you earning less money by doing the same or more work, that may, if you're in the beginning part of your career, or if you're relaunching a stalled career, right? Or if you're just in a spot right now where you're not dealing with volume and you're looking to get to volume, that may sound okay. That may sound like, well, that's, again, that little bit more on that side is better than not getting it at all. I continue to warn you about the something is better than nothing mentality. And sometimes I think I'd rather just take the list side and only do the work on the list side and have somebody else represent the other person. Because now my time is freed up from that other side of the transaction to go and make a full commission with someone else. Right? But if you're not thinking from a lead generation perspective, if you're not thinking about what you're saying no to when you say yes to something, right? There's always an opportunity cost. So when you say yes to that dual agency arrangement for less money, you're by default, you're saying no to someone else that you could be working with that does offer you what you would consider a full commission. Now, again, you get to determine what a full commission is. That's your business. I know what it was for me, right? I don't get to tell you what that is. I can certainly make suggestions because I think you're all worth way more than many of you accept on the listing form. And yet, I don't not understand why you do it sometimes. Does that help answer that question, Mara? It's kind of a long answer to a to a short question, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it totally helps. That's what I always said. I said, why are we offering 4%? Why don't we try to go for a higher thing? I mean, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I
well,
would,
and so let's be clear about where commissions come from, right? Commission asks from your clients, they only come from one place. They
Right.
come from us. They come from the real estate community. They come from other people not understanding how to hold their how to defend their commissions, right?
Mhm.
I will tell you that from when I was a big expired lister, and oftentimes, and I knew they were not telling me the truth, but oftentimes sellers would say to me, "Oh, well, you know what? Paying you 6%. You know, we paid our last agent whatever the number was, way less than that." I said, "I understand. I'm curious. How did that work out for you?" Right? I'm sitting here because your house didn't sell because you tried to be cheap. So whether that's accurate or inaccurate, if you're trying to use that as a way for me to lower my fee, that doesn't work. Right? Call them on that. Have that discussion. I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, were you interested in finding the least expensive realtor or putting the most amount of money in your pocket? Because I am the guy for one of those things and not for the other. So which is more important to you? Well, we want more money in my pocket. Great. That's the guy I am. Woohoo. Sign here. Right? Just be cautious around how you address how you come at commissions, because here's the thing: it starts in your head first. It has nothing to do with scripts until you can rectify in your head how much you're worth. Once you got it nailed down in your head, then you figure out words to help defend it if you need to. But once you figure out how much you're worth, if you behave the way that amount of money actually behaves, people don't question it very often. Eric, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Rick. I just wanted to refocus on your initial question, which was, what do we take away from last Thursday?
Oh yeah, we did have that conversation, didn't we? Go ahead.
Because we've been talking about commission for a long time now. And I do recall that I said it was one of the best sessions I've had so far on Ignite, which is still true. You proved me wrong tonight and tomorrow and Thursday. But what I do recall is that if you follow the scripts that you've taught us and that we discussed, in which I even was a little play in the role play, this is a very powerful package. And what I took away from it, so I've been focusing on the pre-listing package, the listing presentation, the strategic, etc. And what I certainly took away from it, and now this may be a shock for some, commission doesn't count. And at the end of the day, you don't talk about it. You try to deflect those questions, or I'll do like Donna says, commission, let me write that down. I'll come back to you. And then you just go on to the next questions or the next conversation. And at the end of the day, you sign the contract. So I think it's a very powerful package if we follow the scripts you taught us. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so Eric makes a really good point. And without commenting on commission, he actually ended up commenting on commission, because really what he said was, if you'll follow this process, you will have far fewer commission conversations than you think you will. And that's just real. It's 110% real. He's 1,000% right on that. Right? What did Venus Williams give us yesterday morning? He's 100,000,000% right. Right? 100,000,000% is a lot of percent, just by the way. And if you're new or newer to the business, or you're newer to the list side of the business, that whole commission conversation, right, can really kind of take up some free space in your head. Don't allow it. Don't allow it. Just follow the process. Follow the process. And here's the other thing I'll mention. Yes, it is sometimes about deflecting the conversation, but it's less about deflecting a commission conversation and more about timing it well, right? Because until we get through all of the rest of this stuff, it's almost impossible to have a valid conversation about commission, right? if someone wants to decide to position their home dead on where they really should, and what I know is that this is going to go on the market tomorrow and have 6 offers by Friday morning. And after that conversation, they also push back on commission. I might choose to be a little more flexible. I might choose not, and yet I might choose to be a little bit more flexible because I already know all of the facts about how this is all going to go down. If instead I have a conversation and this particular person is really adamant about listing the property way higher than it needs to be, well, guess what? I might agree to still take the listing after we have a quick conversation around the challenges that number may bring us, and a path forward from a timing perspective about how much time we'll give that number to do its damage in the market, and then we'll come back and correct it or address it. However, in that scenario, now I know, like Donna's made herself clear about who she is and how she's going to push forward in this transaction. And I know I'm going to have to spend more time, effort, and energy to help her understand the market better. So now I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, now if a commission objection comes up, I'm not sure how I'm not going to be as flexible on that. If I had chosen to be flexible with somebody who was far more willing to agree with the data, right, and take steps forward. So I don't really think you can have a valid commission conversation literally until you're signing the contract, because you haven't been through a needs analysis. You haven't had a conversation about fiduciary. You haven't been through the market conditions, and you haven't had an SPA conversation, right? Those are all pieces of a larger puzzle. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Bogdan, am I crazy?
Sometime, but not
Yeah.
as crazy as I am.
Well, that is true. What do you got for us?
No, I just wanted to tell a success story with the commission menu. I don't know who asked me when I send it if I have a success story, and I have now one from this Saturday. So I have these clients that I helped them with a rental, and now the rental, they have another rental in Stanford, and the renter left and they wanted to rent it, didn't rent as fast as they wanted, so they want to sell it. So when they call me, they're like, yeah, we invested a lot of money and this and that. Can you do something? Can you do something? I'm like, you know what? Let me see it first, and then we can talk about commissions. So I adjusted the commissions, the menu to, for their apartment. So when I went and I told him, here's what I think is we can sell it for, and this is my commission menu. I can do everything. I started with 6 instead of 7 because I knew there's gonna be a lot of opposition. So I started with 6. I said, this is what I'm gonna offer, for 6. I can do, because you pass client, I can do 5.5, but I'm not gonna cover the home warranty. And they said, yeah, okay. Now, it's just a difference of 1% between what you want and what can I give you for 5.5.
See, and so Bogdan makes a really good point, and let's be clear about it. It's not about 5 or 6 or 4. There's a lot of different numbers in between 5 and 6%, right? And so if you start at a discount number, it's very difficult to go up. If you don't start at a discount number, you have a choice about whether or not you want to go down. And if you start at someplace like 6, I can't tell you how many 5.85% listings I took, 5.65% listings I've taken. Like, you don't have to necessarily be going down by a half or by a full point. There's a lot of different numbers, right? So just recognize that you have lots of flexibility in there. Donna, and then we're going to cruise forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, it's not a scary situation to eventually get to a place where you're talking about commission. It's just not. It's not an arm wrestling match. Nobody's going to get hurt at the end of the day. And if you listen to Bogdan's voice just then, how calm and matter of fact, and this is kind of, here's what we got, this is what I can do. I believe that that's exactly the way he sounds when he's talking to his clients, because he knows, as I do too, I know what I'm willing to work for. I know the number that I need to get to make my business run. And there may be clients that are not willing to pay that, and that's okay. They don't get to have me. They don't get to have Bogdan. And that's okay. That's their choice. They're allowed to do that. And yet with this presentation that Rick walked us through, they see a difference. We sound different. We bring different information. We're stronger. They have confidence that we'll get the job done. And in the end, that's really the most important thing.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Don't live in fear. Terror is a bad place to make decisions from, right? And so instead recognize that what your colleagues are telling you is 110% true. It's just simpler to have a value, know what your value is, and walk people through it. Right? I'll tell you, sometimes I see agents get into a bit of a mess because someone will say, "Oh goodness, 6%. Like, is that the best you can do?" There's an answer to that question. The answer is yes. What other questions do you have? And instead of just saying yes, you get pushed into this, what you feel like is the right thing to do, which is to say, "Oh, well, right?" And you get all, that's not a winning position, right? Is that the best you can do? It is. Is there anything else that I can answer before we sign the listing? Right? If you'll get better and better at pivoting to a close or answering things simply. I can remember one time Debbie and I were listing a house. It was Christmas time, and we were in this house over on Lounsbury Road or Lane. I forget whichever one is over by Route 7. And we call it the Christmas house because there were more Christmas decorations in this house than I have ever seen in any 3 different houses that I've been in. And we got finished having a conversation, and yes, those were still the days when we were going to the kitchen table instead of pulling them back into the office. And we got to the contract, and they were going through the contract. And again, we just typed 6% in there. It was never blank. It wasn't like you sit in front of somebody and fill in the number. That's just typed in there, right? It must be true if it's in print, so it's just typed in there. We take the liberty of doing that on your behalf, right? Because some of you won't do it yourselves. So we just do it for you to make it simpler. So it's just typed in there. And it was funny because the sellers got to that paragraph, right? Paragraph number 10, which said 6%. And he was willing to just move forward on it. And she was willing absolutely not to move forward on it. And yet nobody wanted to have a conversation with us around it. So it like stopped, and we're just kind of sitting there, and she's looking at him, and she points to the number, and he looks at the number and looks back at her like, I see it, right. And so he's moving on, and he's going to page 2, and she's pulling it back to page 1, and she's pointing, and it's all this nonverbal stuff. Like, I swear, if I looked under the table, they were probably kicking each other back and forth to try and get some kind of something. And at some point, and again, like, we're sitting there, we're clearly seeing what was going on. And so I kind of put my hand on Debbie's arm like this to say, you know what, let's just let this play out. And it did play out. And they signed the contract and we moved on. We didn't even have a conversation. And yet in certain scenarios, can you see where someone might say, "Oh goodness, you stopped at the commission. Oh, do you have a question to kind of answer?" Like, we just let silence do the heavy lifting. They worked it all out among themselves silently. It was kind of brilliant to watch. And we walked out with our commission intact. All right, guys, I know there's more questions and more stuff going on. I'm going to circle back to it because we do have to move forward. Okay, so again, I will come back to what's in the chat and we'll go through it. Well, you know what, it's going to be off topic at that point. Bogdan, did you have something really fast?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you know what you're worth, you're confident in what you're gonna, bring to the table, and people are not gonna say no when you come with confidence.
100%. Dario, if we take a 4% split between the agent and KW, would be 4%, not a 6%. You may have to unmute and explain that to me. I'm not sure I understand that. Greg, ask the seller if they would like to go into their job the next day and make 2/3 of their normal salary. Yeah. So if you, from an objection handler perspective, I don't necessarily encourage picking a fight, but if it gets to a point where you're willing to not take the listing over the money, then that is certainly a good point, right? And yet it's certainly a mindset, right? And Eric said something before. I never went into a restaurant and said, could I have the steak, but I want to only pay, X instead of what you have on the menu. Like you're not negotiating every dollar of everything. Dario, go ahead. You are still muted. There you go. Nope, we're still not hearing you for some reason.
Hey, Rick?
Yep, there you are. No, that's Donald.
No, I think he's asking if, for example, we should take a 4% split if the split would be 4% with Keller Williams as opposed to 6%. So would we use the 4% split that we get to split between us and Keller Williams, or would you use a 6% split? I think that's what he's asking.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm still not sure I understand what the question actually is. If it's, I think I addressed that earlier, right? Where you get to make your choice about what commission you choose, right? And we just support that. So if you're taking a 4% listing and you're offering 2 out, right? And so just so we're clear on vocabulary, guys, when you're talking about commissions, don't use the word split, because the word split is only a conversation between the market center and you, right? So if you take, maybe that's what Dario is asking. So if you take a 4% listing and you offer 2% out and you keep 2%, we calculate company dollar and royalty off of the 2% that you kept on your side. Hopefully that answers the question. You get to make decisions about your commissions, and we get to support your decisions. Okay, perfect. So we got that question answered. Excellent. All right, so I want to spend just a smidge of time objection handling some pricing, because I know some of you went through that SPA and said, okay, well, that's lovely, except the person who was on the other side of that SPA only said yes, 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 and yes, right? There was no pushback. And we did that on purpose so that you could hear the through line, right? So would it be helpful, I'll ask this question. Do you want to ask some questions about objections that you have either heard or think you might hear? Or would it be helpful for someone to just kind of role play with me, someone who has more objections to the process and the numbers? Which would be more helpful? See, now's the perfect time for my Zoom poll. I just didn't prepare my Zoom poll in time.
Rick?
Yeah.
I do have a situation where one of the people I did a listing presentation with, his property had been on the market. It was marked at $399, and coming back in and reintroducing him to listing his property again, he thinks that it should be $100,000 more than what it was when it was listed before. And nothing, what's going on in their little town does justify bringing it up a little bit, but not $100,000. So then he asked me if I would please do a comp with regard to the neighboring towns, which I did. And again, that was even worse with regard to what his property would be evaluated at. So I haven't gone back to him, but it is going to be a little bit awkward because, I think he's going to give a lot of pushback because he really wants to start out at this figure, which is about $50,000 or $60,000 more than what I would think he should be listing it at. And that's still giving him an increase over last summer.
Great. So we can use that example as the basis for some objection handling, right? And so here's someone who Barbara brings comps, and so it was on at $399, right? And so and didn't sell. So just by the way, especially when you're listing an expired, the best data point you have is the number that it was on previously for and didn't attract a buyer, right? So don't forget to use that one because it's a really important one. If this was on at $399 and didn't sell, well, there's some information in there, right? If you were on at $450, Mr. and Mrs. Expired, there's a reason for that, right? Who knows the number one reason why houses don't sell?
They're priced too high.
Price, that's right. What's the number two reason?
Price.
Price is exactly right. What's the number three reason?
Price again.
Price.
That's exactly right. Should I keep going or do you get the point? We have about an hour and 17 or 18 minutes or so, 27 minutes, whatever time it is. Right? You just keep going. The number 14 reason the house doesn't sell. The number 27 reason the house doesn't sell. Right? So it's always about the number because at a certain number, someone will purchase it. That's just real. Right? That's a fact. It's a law. It's kind of like gravity. You can't decide that gravity isn't real, right? So the idea is the idea in a scenario like this is you go through the process. You find the best 3 sold comps. The best 3 sold comps. Now, the best 3 sold comps in a different town are entirely irrelevant, right? Barbara knows that. She did it because she was asked to. I'm not so sure I would have volunteered for that. I think I would have just handled it at that moment in time to say, you know what, I understand where you're going. Please note, appraisers are not going to look outside of the town that you live in. So the numbers and the comps in additional towns, they're just not as relevant as maybe you want them to be. Let's stick with what an appraiser will actually utilize to comp the house out at. That's the best 3 sold comps in your town in the last 6 months, if at all possible, in the last 3 months, especially when the market's moving quickly, right? So you find the best 3 sold comps in the last 3 months and you lay them on the table, just like this process brings us through. You just do this process. And so the seller may look at that and say, well, I was on $399 and you're bringing me comps now, let's say 425, 429, and 437. And if he was on at $399 a year ago, is it possible that the comps for him today are 10 or even 12% higher?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because of what's happened in the last 6 months. So that is real. Have you calculated the year-over-year price increase based on median sales price and given that information? So in the city of X, year over year, we have seen an increase in the median sale price of 11%. I'm curious, Mr. Seller Person, what specific evidence exists that justifies your home taking a 22% increase? Because if you do the math on the numbers that he's looking for, right, it's like 20% or whatever it is, 22%. That's a script. What specific evidence exists that would justify a 22% jump for your house alone? You do see why that's a really good question, right?
Yep,
Why is that a really good question?
because there's no evidence supporting what he wants.
Exactly right, because no evidence actually exists, right? Now, getting people to admit there's no evidence, that is sometimes a tricky spot to be put into, right? Because sometimes people don't want to. And so sometimes you end up kind of going round and round and round. Some of you know the story of the time I used see, for me, if somebody doesn't answer the question right the first time when I ask a question, I just typically ask the same question again. I do that in business. I do that in life. Right? Did you ever call a credit card company and attempt to, I don't know, either have a fee waived or get something taken care of, and you speak to someone and they say, I'm so sorry, Mr. Scott, we can't do that. Okay, great. Can I speak to someone else? What? Is there someone else I can speak to? Well, sure. I'll just ask the same question to somebody else and keep asking until I get someone who says yes. Because inevitably you do find someone who says, oh yeah, I can do that for you. Oh, great. Excellent.
Best way, you hang up and you call again until you find the person.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so in this scenario, the same thing is true, right? And I had a seller in front of me one time. I was helping one of you get a price reduction on a property. And I had these folks in front of me who, man, they were just about as stubborn as anyone I've ever spoken to. And they were stuck on a number. And so we got through the process, showed them the best 3 sold comps, right? They'd been on the market for about 4 months. So some of the comps were different that we got to show them, but they didn't say anything different about where they really needed to be. Showed them the list of actives, showed them where they were versus where the comps were, right? So all the data, it's all pretty clear when you lay it in front of everybody. They don't have to like it, that's not required. But they do have to recognize that the facts you're putting in front of them are in fact facts. You have 3 sold comps and you have a list of competitive properties. And so we got to the point and she said to me, you know what, I see what you're trying to do. And I said, well, tell me what it is you think I'm trying to do. And she said, well, you're trying to get me to reduce the price of the house. And I said, you know what, I so appreciate that. Would it surprise you to know that ultimately what I'm looking to do is share objective data with you so that you can make a really great choice. What I'm here to do is help you make a great choice, which has nothing to do with increasing the price, decreasing the price, or keeping the price as it is. It's your house. You get to make that decision. I just want to make sure you're making the best decision possible. And so in order to make the best decision possible, we have to rely on the facts and the data that are available not just to us, but to all the buyers agents, and all the appraisers that will come and appraise the house to justify the buyer's loan. So I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs., I forget their name, what specific evidence exists to justify you keeping the house at the number that it's at? And she gave me some, to do about, she spent money on the kitchen or whatever. And I said, I understand. And yet I'm looking for specific evidence. And every time I say those words, I always point back to the data, right? Donna mentioned that the other day. That's part of the physical part of my script is what specific evidence in the data can you point to that we could then utilize to help an appraiser justify a different number? Where does that exist? Could you show me that? And we went round and round and round and round and round. And she went through I need this much money. I want this much money. My neighbor said that it was worth this much money. My sister had an opinion, right? I called Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and they each had an opinion, right? Everybody gets to have all their reasons. And every time she put up another roadblock, I asked the same question. I validated it and said, I understand. And yet, what specific evidence? And sometimes I would punch a different word, so it sounded maybe a little bit different, but it was the same script. And by the 5th time that I was about to say the same exact words, she was frustrated. He was frustrated because I was making his wife frustrated. And so I looked at them and I said, Just, their last name was Just, Mr. and Mrs. Just, at the risk. First of all, let me just point out that I can tell that you're frustrated. Remember I told you about calling out the humanness in a situation? If people are frustrated, tell them that you recognize that. Because if you don't, they think that you don't get it, right? So they're sitting there frustrated and you're sitting there saying the same words over and over again with a big smile on your face. They think either you're an idiot or that you're just not seeing what's going on for them. So just call that out. And so I did and said, clearly I can see that you're frustrated. And I am so sorry because I have a feeling that you think I'm kind of the root cause of your frustration this evening. And that was certainly not my intent. Would it surprise you to know that the root cause of your frustration is probably less me and more the data, the facts that we have to deal with? And I can absolutely appreciate being frustrated by the facts. Again, I own a property in this county as well. And if you're disappointed by what the facts are telling us, I may well be disappointed if I were in your shoes. And yet, now remember, this is the 5th time I was about to say these same words. So I did a little tap dance before I said them. I said, and at the risk of one of you, or maybe even both of you, punching me square in the nose, I do have to ask that question one more time. Understanding the struggle you've had in the first 4 months of your property being on the market, of obtaining buyers' eyes that actually don't reject your property based on its positioning. What specific evidence can you point to that will give me the ammunition I need to help you get a fighting chance with buyers to justify staying where you are? And it was the 5th time after I called out their frustration in a professional and human way, in a caring way, where she stopped, she looked at him, she started to cry. And I thought, okay, now we can get somewhere, because the wall came down, right? And she said, there is no evidence. And I said, I understand. And I also understand how upsetting this is. I know that sometimes being a seller is tough. I just want you to know that I am here to support whatever decision it is you make. I just take my job of helping you make the best business decision possible really seriously. And so if you make the best business decision possible here tonight, and that for you is to stay where you are, knowing full well that that likely will deliver the same result 4 months from today, then I'm okay with that. But what you told me when we started this conversation was that you needed to get this house sold, and they had given me the motivation behind it, right? So I'm curious, knowing that there is no evidence based on the data that we have to work with, what do you think the next best step is to bring a buyer to the table? I didn't say take a price reduction. As a matter of fact, I will tell you, I haven't said I suggest a price reduction in my career in a very long time. In a very, very long time. I'd rather just consult people and ask them what they think the next best step is. Because at that point, when I asked that question, she said, well, clearly we're going to have to make some adjustments with the money we're going to receive from this house and where we're headed. I said, I understand. Let me ask you this. Are you willing to do that? It's a really important question, guys, because understanding it and being willing to do it sometimes are two different things for sellers, right? And so the follow-up of are you willing to do that is important, because they have to now move themselves. They've kind of understood it now. Okay, I kind of get it. Now they have to be willing to actually take the action. And from there, we had a conversation. Great. So yes, you're willing to take that step. Based on the data that we reviewed, where do you think the positioning needs to be moved to in order for you to outperform all of the rest of the competition on this page? It was a long, hard, difficult conversation, but guess what? She made a really good choice that day. She chose to actually take a price reduction. And within 6 days, she had 2 full price offers at that new price, and they got to go on their merry way, right? It had the happy ending that so many of them do when people make decisions based on facts, right? And so what I want to impress upon you is that your job is not to convince people that you're right. Your job is to convince people that they're right. It's actually the exact opposite. But them being right has to be rooted in something. It has to be based on a foundation of actual fact, not fantasy in their head, right? One of the things that I will share with you is that when I have a pricing conversation with someone and they choose a number, if I'm in agreement with the number, I will repeat their number. If I am not in agreement with their number, you will not hear that number cross my lips. If someone should be on the market at $495, and I'll for me, I always had a tolerance level of about, depending on the price point, between 8 and 12%, right? With conversation and strategy, but I had a tolerance of 8 to 10%. If someone came in and said, $549, you're not going to hear me say, oh my goodness, why do you think $549 makes sense? Because the second you say the number that they've said, it's as if you have validated it. That's what they hear in their head. Well, you said $549. No, you said $549. I just repeated it. So here's my advice. Don't repeat it. Only repeat numbers that you agree with, because that's what you're validating. Somebody put in the chat, and it's an accurate point, right? So Donald said, right, the tone of how you're speaking. Remember, sellers are not stupid. They know all the answers. They know all the answers before you walk in the door. They just sometimes get stuck in whatever they've cooked up for themselves, or they're disappointed by the news, or they're excited by the news and they don't want to show you because they think that somehow that puts them in some sort of weird negative position, or right? So sellers, they're smart. You're there to help them be as smart as they are. And I think a lot of times agents approach this conversation from a point of, I have the facts, therefore I am right, and anything else that you say, you must be wrong. And so let me continue to show you how right I am. Remember, when you focus on being right, it pushes the focus on the seller of them being wrong. And if you remember what I said last week, the first time the seller feels made wrong by you, you don't get the listing. Because now you're not in partnership. You're not a consultant anymore, right? Even if you don't mean it, you come across as a pushy know-it-all. And that's not what being the one is all about, right? Being the one is walking into the room and people saying, my goodness, right? This person sounds different. They care about me and my family. They're asking me questions about what I think. It's the other reason this process, guys, the SPA process that I gave you, is so powerful, because this isn't about me walking in and telling you what I think. It's about me sitting with you and consulting you through a process where you get to make a great decision based on facts. I know we kind of keep saying that, but it's important that you pull away from this session with that information firmly in place. Does that help from an objection handling perspective in terms of pricing?
Yes.
So Barbara, in that specific scenario, again, I think more data is required, right? You almost never go wrong with more data. More data to help people understand that if year over year, that particular town has seen a 10% increase, well, then there's no reason why some version of an increase over where they were last year might not be possible. But certainly a 25% increase or a 20% increase when everyone else has seen 10, I think I'd be asking some questions around that. right? And it starts with the script that will save you in almost any pricing conversation. And that is, I'm curious what specific evidence based on the data that we've just reviewed exists to justify X. Right? It's just a great script that it's a partnership script. The reason I like it so much is because it keeps you sitting on the same side of the table as the seller. Like let's hand in hand figure this out together. Guys, I will go ahead, Barbara.
I think that's why he wanted me to go to other towns, because it was such a thorough look at all that's taken place over the last 8 months. And he said, this, I can't believe all the stuff you have here, but have you considered the outside towns? It's like, well, sorry, no, I didn't,
Was that
so
him?
that's why I thought, he said, and I'm not in a hurry to sell. He said, I'm not in a hurry. It's not something I have to do. And so I said, listen, if it would make you feel better, I'm happy to go ahead and get the comps in the neighboring towns. Be happy to sit down with you and go over them again in a couple of days. He said, that'd be great. And the news is worse, of course. And I understand it's not going to be appraised by those town standards, but it's going to be, I think he's going to be surprised to find out that he would fare even worse if we did those comps.
Yeah, got it. Here's the one thing I'll say on, can you look at other towns for me? My concern about doing something like that is that you're delaying the inevitable of this is what it is. Does it make sense for you or not? Right. And
yeah.
it can be used as a distraction tool, right? Instead of focusing on my house and what the comps say about my house, let's focus on all these other things that don't have like no relevance so that I can delay making a decision on. So the way to help him might be to say, again, if this ever comes up again, I understand that might be something that you were, maybe ask a question. Hey, I'm curious, why other towns? Talk to me about why that would make sense in our conversation, right? See what he has to say. And then, and perhaps as he goes through, because oftentimes when you ask a question, instead of just making a statement, they kind of answer it themselves. And he gets to the point of saying, oh, you know what, I guess that doesn't really make sense anyway. So, let's not do that. And now you've saved yourself time.
When we asked him that question, he said, it's a small town and there's such a small inventory. And granted, there just aren't that many homes that have been on the market and sold over the last 8 months. But what has sold is pretty much in his price range. So they were good comps. So he just wanted to kind of get a bigger picture. He said he just would feel better having a bigger picture with regard to what's going on in towns right next to him that are considered, he thinks they're considered in the same way that his town is considered. So again, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I wish I could have had a better or a firmer. I think overall everything went really, really well, and yet we walked out without the listing.
Yeah. Well, you know why? I can tell you why. Because you said something earlier that tipped the hand as to why there's no listing yet, and it was something the seller said. I'm in no rush. I don't have to sell. Right? That there's no motivation, right? And so one of the things I want you guys to recognize is that when you have sellers who are unmotivated, they will spend a whole lot of your time not worrying about being on the market, right? And so when they're unwilling to look at the data that makes sense, part of the wild goose chase that he sent you on is, and again, it may have solidified something positively for you, but the wild goose chase he sent you on ultimately didn't bring him any closer to listing the property, right? Instead, it just was distraction. So I would just be cautious around it. Big town, little town, fast moving market, slow moving market. I get it, and yet I think I would choose to nip that in the bud earlier by simply saying, would it surprise you to know that that's actually not how this works, right? Would it be helpful if we kind of focused in on just the comparables that we'll be using to price your particular home? Go ahead, Debbie. What else?
I think it's a perfect moment when when you choose to use pain rather than pleasure to move him off his position. And it doesn't come naturally. It's something you need to practice, because it's asking questions about what's that going to do for you? Where are you going to be a year from now if you don't start really taking the action that you need to make the move? And dig down. It's money, it's relationships, it's maintenance on the property. I mean, you can draw an ugly picture.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? And it's uncomfortable for a lot of us to start pushing some of those pain buttons, right? Because we think we're there to be all smiles and lollipops. And yet really, the reality is, as a listing agent, you're there again to present data and help guide them through the process of interpreting that data so that they can make the best decision possible. Right? And sometimes asking questions around some pain points, you know, one of my favorite pain point scripts is, you know what, I completely understand that, Mrs. Orr. I'm curious, if this doesn't go the way you planned, what's your plan B? Have you thought about a plan B? Right? Because oftentimes plan B is the thing they don't really want to talk about. And by going there, you're forcing them to think about this might not go the way I want. Again, in the larger picture of objection handling only really works well when the person you're handling the objections with has a vested interest in the result, right? And unmotivated sellers don't necessarily have a stated vested interest in any kind of result. It's let's put it on $100,000 higher. Sounds very much to me like, hey, who knows? Maybe something will happen. And if you remember, I spoke earlier about opportunity cost, right? When you say yes to that, you're now spending time, effort, resources, and energy with someone who isn't all that attached to the outcome of a sold sign. And by default, you're saying no to others who may have more motivation to actually get the job done inside of what is reasonable. So just be careful about what you say yes to, because the other side of that is the opportunity cost. And it's important to always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Questions, comments, concerns, queries, croissant. What else you got? Anything else on pricing? I know it's an enormous topic, and we could literally be here until 10 o'clock tonight going through different scenarios. What I want you to pull away from today with is that SPA process that we gave you on Thursday is a winner. It keeps you objective, and as much as possible has the seller positioning the home based on data instead of you coming to them with a number, right? And here's what I can tell you, because a lot of people have come to me over the years and said, you know what, I just lost the listing. I'm so upset. Great, how can I help? Well, I just don't know what I could have done differently or better to win. If you come and ask me that question, the very first question I will ask you, so be prepared for it. The very first question I will ask you is, I'm curious, did you utilize the listing consultation process that we taught you in Ignite? And invariably, the answer is, well, sort of, or no, not really, or, okay, well, see, it's hard for me to help you diagnose where you might have gone wrong if you weren't setting the stage well and setting expectations and having that needs analysis conversation and talking about fiduciary versus functionary and getting to a point of having those market conditions questions we went through answered, going through those 2 quick graphs to give a macro version of what the market is doing, and then specifically going through the SPA the way we went through it with you to limit that data and have a simple conversation about the micro version of the conversation, which is their house. Or sometimes I hear, Well, yes, but they didn't like my price. Ugh. Right? The whole idea of the SPA is that you're not bringing them a price. If you have convinced yourself that that's your role as a listing agent, we have to unbrainwash you because that's not your role. It's just not. And trust me, I've done it both ways. There is one way that is far more effective and gets you and the seller the result that you're looking for. And then there's the other way of just coming in and showing people how smart you are. Here's what's real, guys. What I've learned over time, nobody cares. Nobody cares how smart you are. What they care about is you caring about them and you caring about what's important to them and you asking about what's important to them and helping guide them through a process that may be a little scary to them, that may be a little intimidating to them. If they've never done it before, it's no wonder. If they did do it before, it might have been 10 years earlier. You wouldn't necessarily be comfortable if you were doing something again for the first time in 10 years, right? You kind of want some guidance. And that's what we're there for. Yes, no, maybe so? Did we beat that horse really good and dead?
Yeah.
Which is a terrible, terrible phrase I shouldn't use, especially now that Sky's among us. I should let Sky explain why I said that. Why did I say that, Sky? What do I know about you that nobody else knows?
I specialize in equine property. I have a lot of horses too, as do my kids. So, but I don't think you can beat this topic enough. So I will let that one go today.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Can I share a quick story on this with that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've had the pleasure of listing my parents' house multiple times now. And you know, you'd think by some point of time they trust your opinion enough, as we ask all our sellers to trust our opinions. And this last time around was recent, and they did not like the number that the data showed. And I made the mistake in the beginning of saying, well, just trust me. Like, this is it. We're here. This is what we're going to list at. And my dad particularly was having none of it. And like you just said, I was like, why aren't they listening to my number? And I went, oh, because I'm treating them like my parents and I'm not treating them like a client. And I got all my data together and I went to their home professionally dressed during COVID with my mask on and everything like I would do with any client that I just met. And I sat down and I laid out all the material for them exactly like you're talking about. And in 15 minutes, my dad was like, oh, well, of course we have to list at this price. This makes so much sense. He was on board. They were totally thrilled. They ended up having an incredibly successful experience. I just heard my mom rave about me to someone else this week. And I thought, you know, we forget, we do this every single day. We think about this all the time and we forget that everyone wants to be shown the data so that they can make an educated decision that makes them go, well, it's the only way that makes sense, really. And that's the number. And I like to give a little cushion so they feel like they can push it up 40,000 and not be, you know, totally fixated on one number. But, you know, it really is important to throw that data at everybody and let them see it, even if they're not data people. I love when people, I'm not a data person. Yeah, I know. Can I just show you these 3 numbers? Then you can see where I'm coming from. But I forget all the time. So thank you for reminding me. Yeah, no, and it's a great story. You may have saved everyone from having to hear the story of me selling my grandparents' house 2 years ago, because it's a very similar story, right? And yet it's the same when you treat people not like clients and like something else, your friends, your neighbors, your parents, your grandparents, people who should know better, however you're treating them, instead of recognizing that we do this all the time and the job is to help guide people through a process. It's their process. Right? They have to go through the process. If you do all the work, they don't get to the same conclusion that you do. It's by doing the work together that everyone arrives at the same spot. Right? Really important to remember. If you're doing all the work, you have somebody at the setting the stage step, right? They're still waiting for you to offer them coffee and you're kind of closing and they didn't come along for the ride because you did all the work. Right, that's the Carol Merrill version of this, right? The presentational version of this.
Let me just talk at you for an hour and then hope that you are at the same place that I am.
That's a totally dated reference, Rick. Only some of us will get that.
Oh, Carol Merrill. Yeah. I'm not sure I even know where it comes from. Where does it come from?
It was Let's Make a Deal.
Oh, okay. So that predates me. I'm far younger than most of you think. So so Carol Merrill, yes, let's make a deal. Indeed. Right. So yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Hey, and you know what? We'll start tomorrow. I will bring you another tool, which I did not send you. So be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. We're not done, but be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I will bring you a tool to help you in pricing conversations, which I prefer to call positioning conversations, right? Because when you're talking about positioning, it's not necessarily about a number, right? It's about a bunch of different things, right? I kind of look at positioning from that Cheerios analogy, right? When the supermarket buys too many Honey Nut Cheerios, what do they do to get rid of them? Well, they literally reposition them. Yes, they make a change in the price, but they also position them differently in the store. They put them at the end of the aisle so that people walking up and down say, oh, look, Honey Nut Cheerios are on sale. I should buy a box 2 for 1, or I should buy 2 boxes 2 for 1, right? So I prefer a positioning conversation than pricing, really, because pricing focuses people on a number, positioning focuses people on the strategy. And the reality is that you get a sold sign when you take the right strategy. Here's one last thing I'll say. So I'll bring you another tool that will help you both in price reduction conversations and in initial pricing conversations that I forgot to send you. So I'll bring that to you tomorrow and send it during the day. So do watch for it. One last thing before we move off of pricing. Be careful that you yourself are not stuck on a number, right? We oftentimes think that sellers get stuck on a number. And my experience, both as a listing agent and as a real estate coach, says that more times than the seller, we get stuck on a number. Like we get fixated on oh, it has to be 479 or else like the world will come to a complete stop. And they want to, now again, in a market moving as quickly as things are today, right? 479, 489, 499. Okay, I get it. They're all the same number. But even in a slower moving market, the difference between 479 and 485 and 489, you know what? I'm just not sure it's worth the whole rigmarole that we sometimes go through to prove ourselves right at 479. If it's within that tolerance, then 489, I'm just as happy to be wrong, frankly. And I will tell you that I have used that as a script with sellers, right? Donna, there is nothing more that I would like to, I would love to be wrong. If the market will prove me wrong, let's have them do that. And so because Donna's decided instead of 495, she really wants 525. Okay, well, we're in a different price point now where that may not work. And yet, you know what? Let's just have a conversation. Donna, I might try an objection handler her back into a range that makes better sense. And if not, we can just simply agree to disagree. Donna, let's take a moment and maybe just agree to disagree on what the data is telling us. And, well, you know what? Let me take a half step back, because I actually like a different script better before we get there. And that's the what if script, right? I don't think I've mentioned the what if script. So Donna, what if we were only making a decision based on the data in front of us, regardless of any other things that you might be thinking, or that you might have heard, or other things that might be important to you? What if we were just making a decision based on the data in front of us? I promise not to hold you to your answer. What would that answer be based on just the data? Because that's a really important, if you can help a seller separate what the data is saying with what they think, and say something like, well, you know, the data, I would say like a 499 number. I understand. And in that scenario, I might say, I couldn't agree more. Now let's talk about the specific evidence that might justify the other number that you were talking about. Right? The 499 we just got from the data. What's that other justification? And maybe there is none, right? And so Donna and I go back and forth and back, and she's stamping her feet saying, you know what, look, dude, you can either, it's 525 or I'm out. In that scenario, I will tell you, for me personally, you each have to make a decision based on the policies in your business, right? As business owners, you need to have standards around what decisions you make. In that scenario, especially if the market were moving as quickly as it were today, but let's not make decisions based on today's market because it's an anomaly, right? Let's think longer, let's think career. I might simply say to Donna, Mrs. Gilbert, I respectfully, it sounds like we may need to agree to disagree on the best path forward for the positioning of your property as it hits the market. It looks like we can agree that the data is pointing to 499. I'm curious, does it make sense in order for us to, Donna, let me ask you another quick question before I even go there. I haven't listed a house in a very long time, so give me a little slack. That wasn't the script. That was me saying it to you. that wasn't the script. So I know some of you are like, wait, what? That's what we say? No. I was talking to you. Donna, other than the price, other than the positioning of your property, are you ready to say yes and go into business with me this evening? And Donna says, well, yeah, except that, this positioning, this pricing thing is important to me. Got it. Well, I'm excited to get started, right? We're gonna isolate that and just make certain. I'm excited to get started. Knowing that we can agree to disagree on the best positioning to start your property on the market with, I'm curious, does it make sense to move forward with your number with the strategy in place just in case the market rejects that number, to then pivot and move to a number that the market might embrace a little bit more? And so now Donna and I are we're just having, again, I'm not wrong, she's not wrong, we're just having a conversation. She still gets to feel like she's in charge, she's calling the shots, because guess what, guys? It's her asset, you don't own it. She gets to make the decision. But I've made it clear that she and I are I'm not just going to nod my head and say yes, right? Because that's just a version of buying the listing, and that's not helping anybody help themselves. But we've now had a small conversation. Donna decides that 525 is where she wants to go. We agree on the fact that we will do that for 7 days. Or maybe we agree that we'll do it for 14 days. I prefer 7, but I'd be happy to do 14. And in 2 weeks, if there's not a specific offer on the table, and be clear about the terms, right? So you're not having an argument 2 weeks later. Well, but we only had 3 showings. Yes, but that's the whole problem, right? So if there's no offer that you have accepted on the table 2 weeks from tonight, we will take a reduction, we'll make an adjustment in the price from the number that you've decided to move forward with down to what? And now we're going to have a conversation about what that reduction looks like. And pre-agree right then and there about how we're going to do that. I would even offer to you that you should actually pre-sign a reduction authorization form so that Donna doesn't get squirrely on me 2 weeks from now. Like 13 days from now, she's like, well, I'm not really sure. Yes, no, you're sure. Look, your signature's right there. Right, you're sure, I'm sure, we're all sure. Yay, let's go. Make sense? All right. So you were all emailed earlier today the anatomy of a seller transaction. So we're gonna take a quick pivot and dive into that. So for those of you who say, wait a minute, we just got to a point of all that pricing conversation with some commission objections in the first 25 minutes, but we never actually signed a listing agreement. That's correct. Simply because we don't have time in this course to bring you through those documents. However, if you look on the calendar, Friday, we have, I think an 11 o'clock and a 1 o'clock. I'm going to bring you through the listing forms and the buyer forms, right? I will record both of those. And in case you can't make it and for some reason don't want to watch these recordings, they've actually been recorded before. So you could actually pre-watch them if you so chose, if you needed to, because they're on the YouTube channel, right? Previous sessions. So we will go through the listing contract and we will go through the buyer contract Friday at 11 and then at 1 in about 50-minute classes. So we'll go through each of those documents with you. So the anatomy of a seller transaction, I'm going to move swiftly through. We will not finish it today, but we will finish it in our first half of tomorrow. And likely by the first half of tomorrow, we will finish our seller unit, and then we will pivot into buyers. As I said to you guys the other day, we're just behind, right? We were supposed to finish on Thursday. We're just starting buyers halfway through Wednesday, so we will not finish. And next week is family reunion, and so we will not meet during family reunion week. So what I can promise you is that we will pick up and finish Ignite Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the week after Ignite. And I apologize if that doesn't jive with someone's schedule. I frankly didn't do a very good job of timing things out. And yet I hope that the time that we spent was as useful as I think it was, right? Sometimes it's to me, it's better to dive into the questions that you have and spend more time on some of this practical detail stuff than to make sure we get through everything in the allotted time. So we will go an extra week. It may only be 2 days that week, but we will go at least an extra day or two the week after family reunion. Okay, I'll answer questions about family reunion right at the end. So seller transaction, anatomy of a seller transaction. You have that list, and what this list is, it's kind of a checklist that we give you so that you don't miss anything, right? You don't miss any of the tasks or activities that come along with being a listing agent. And so a lot of our agents will receive this and then just kind of use it as a checklist. Some of them use it to build their own kind of Excel spreadsheet checklist, shorten things up a little bit, because I've expanded upon some things here so that you have a valid read on what the activity is. It may be simpler to just shorten it up. So let's run through it real quick. So number one, you're going to receive an offer from the buyer's agent. So the first thing that you're going to do is check that all the paperwork that you need to have there is included. And that may be an offer. Know that depending on where you practice and the type of market, that may come on one of 3 different forms, right? It may come on an offer to purchase form, which for all intents and purposes is like a non-binding binder. It may come on a purchase agreement, which is a 2-page offer form, which does have some language in paragraph 4 on page 2 of that 2-page document that gives it a little bit more teeth, right? That when both parties sign it, it is supposed to take the place of a contract until attorneys actually draw a longer term contract. Or in most of the rest of the state, right? So again, this is in Fairfield County, we do things differently than most of the rest of the state, right? I guess we think we're special. It's kind of annoying, but it is just kind of how it's done here. In northern Fairfield County, kind of the greater Danbury area into Ridgefield, even Wilton, that's really more your offer to purchase, right? Southern Fairfield County along the coast, up into Wilton and Weston, that's really more your purchase agreement. And then the eastern border of Fairfield County, and then almost the entire rest of the state, both north and east, utilizes a 4-page contract, the standard 4-page real estate contract, most of the time. And then, of course, there are anomalies like Greenwich that typically works more like New York with memorandum of like letters of intent style offers. But for the most part, you'll receive something based on an offer to purchase, a purchase agreement, or a 4-page contract. I know because of how fast the market is moving, more of you are receiving and or writing things on that standard 4-page contract than probably ever in your careers. And that likely will change if and when the market starts to slow down a little bit, right? Because generally speaking, we in Fairfield County, we don't typically write those contracts. And then, of course, you'll receive a copy of any earnest money that might be down, a letter from a lender, or a broker qualifying the buyer. If it's a cash offer, you'll need to have some version of proof of funds, right? So there's all these things that you're checking to make sure the offer has, such that you can then have a conversation with all the data with the seller. And then, of course, any signed disclosures, the property condition disclosure form, the lead disclosure, any dual agency disclosures or consent forms that might be required. If it's a short sale, you might have a short sale disclosure or an inclusion exclusion form. So that's kind of the list of things that you can expect from an offer. Now, remember, receiving a phone call from an agent saying, "Ooh, I have an offer for you. I'll get it to you later." That is not an offer. You have not received anything yet. So please don't pick up the phone and call your seller and say, "Oh, guess what? We're getting an offer. We're getting an offer." Do you see what the problem with that is? You do that, and then guess what? You sit staring at the phone for the next 5 hours until it's 10 o'clock, and the seller's like, "Where's my offer?" And you look like a fool because no offer actually came. So when there's an offer in your hand physically, or physically you receive a PDF in an email, that's when you can call the seller and discuss that you have an offer. Until then, a verbal offer is not an offer. A verbal warning of an offer is not an offer, right? So stay firmly rooted in receiving things in writing. And of course, number 3, if dual agency exists, there is a process that you need to go through, right? If dual agency exists, and that will, I get this question asked a lot, right? Does that include market center to market center, right? So certainly if you are the only agent involved, if you represent the buyer and the seller, there's a dual agency scenario. If you and someone else in your office represents the buyer and the seller respectively, there's a dual agency scenario, right? In your own brokerage. The question is that I get asked a lot is, what if someone in the Ridgefield Market Center represents the seller and the Stamford Market Center represents the buyer? Do we need to run through dual agency consent forms? And so I'm going to give you the 2 answers to that question. The first and simplest answer is yes. We ask you to go ahead and produce a dual agency consent form, even though technically it's not as required as we make it sound, right? And I'm just being transparent with you because some of you know agency law and think, well, wait a minute, it's 2 different brokerages. That is correct. However, I am the broker of both of those offices. I broker them through 2 separate corporate entities. So as far as the state's concerned, it's 2 different legal entities. However, as far as our clients are concerned, I'm still just one guy. And I would hate for any of you to be put in a scenario to be questioned by a client about dual agency and have to get specific, have to go in, like, feel like you didn't have to do it based on a technicality. It's not that difficult a conversation to have. And so we just prefer that you cover your bases and anything else that you might feel like you want to cover by having that conversation and filling out that document, even if it's market center to market center. Now, the other question that will come up is, what about someone in the Trumbull Market Center? I am not the broker of the Trumbull Market Center. I used to be the broker of the Trumbull Market Center. I am no longer the broker of the Trumbull Market Center. So therefore, that is a separate entity and does not require any kind of dual agency consent. Make sense?
Can I ask a question? One small question.
Yes, Victoria.
Yeah. I am not on the picture because I'm just don't look good in the picture. That's why, not because of
You look beautiful. Go ahead.
So my question is, if I am the buyer and I am representing myself, I am buyer agent and I am a buyer, do I need to do dual agency?
Only if you're making an offer on a property that is also listed by someone in the Stamford Market Center or the Ridgefield Market Center.
Oh, okay.
Right. So dual agency comes in when we take a buyer and a seller and put them in the same world. If it's you as in 2 roles, you already know that you are the role that you and you know what you're doing. So there's no consent there. Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Real quick, I can understand you have to disclose dual agency if as an agent you would represent both parties.
Mhm.
But if we have designated agency, so another agent in the same brokerage represents the buyer, I represent the seller, why do we need your consent for that? Because it says brokers and the broker's consent. Why is that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in our offices, unless you are on both sides, most brokerages choose whether they practice dual agency or designated agency, right? And you have a choice of one or the other. What we chose is designated agency is how most of you behave anyway, right? So that if you represent the buyer, so say, Eric, you represent the buyer and Stuart represents the seller, right? So you're in the same office. Designated is how typically agents behave in a situation like that, because Eric, you know the buyers, and Stuart, you know the sellers, so you're going to behave as if you're working solely for them. Under true dual agency, that's not true, right? Under dual agency, you represent really neither of the two, and Stuart represents neither of the two, right? And so what we chose was designated agency in that scenario because it's how you guys were behaving anyway. I'm going to get to your question in a second. The dual portion of that, we also didn't think it was fair to disallow someone to work on both sides of a transaction. It was one of my favorite things to do when I was still in the field, to be on both sides. And so what we chose was the only time dual is allowed in our offices is if you are on both sides of the transaction. And then that's a true dual scenario. The reason that my consent is necessary is because regardless of whether you are operating in dual agency or designated agency, I, as the broker, am always in dual. And I need to know that before anyone moves forward in that scenario, that the seller and the buyer have consented to that arrangement. So it's like a check on this on the brokerage side to make sure, and it waves the flag from where I sit of me saying, okay, regardless of what we're saying, who represents you, as the broker of both of these offices or as the broker of the office, I'm always in dual. And so therefore, I don't have loyalties to any one. I owe honesty and fair dealings to each of them, but I don't have any loyalties to either one as the broker of the brokerage. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. So Connecticut does not have a designated agency status for brokers. No. Do they in Massachusetts, Sky?
Yes, at least my understanding of it is very different, where we don't have to do exactly what you just described. Our brokers can stay out of it by us checking the box that says designated agency, Sky Minkler is my agent. I understand she works for this brokerage. And that's all we do. That's all we deal with it. That's the end of it forever.
Got it.
Unless I decide to represent both sides.
Yes. Well, I'm in the middle of getting my Massachusetts license, so I will be able to answer that question shortly on the Massachusetts side. But in Connecticut, yes, as a broker in dual, I am never designated. I personally am always a dual agent, even in a designated scenario between two other agents.
So in a nuts and bolts way, is there a form or something that we have to have the parties sign when that offer is accepted?
There is. There was, and the way that works is we actually, the consent has to happen before the offer is presented. So in that scenario where Eric represents the buyer and Stuart represents the seller, Eric would fill out the offer paperwork, utilize that designated agency form, which is all found with the paperwork in Command and DocuSign, get his buyers to consent to it, send that document over to Stuart and say, I have an offer for you on 123 Main Street. Can you get the seller's consent to designated agency? Stuart would get the sellers to consent to it. Then one of them would send it to me. I consent on behalf of the brokerage. And then Eric can present the offer to Stuart.
Okay. And so as a practical matter, do the clients ever have confusion or deny it?
They do, but not very often. And so here's what I would encourage. I would encourage upfront on the buy side and upfront on the list side, have a short conversation around what dual agency or designated agency exists and is possible. So it's not the first time they're hearing it when the offer is actually written, because I find that then you can reference, if you remember, we spoke about this when when you hired me, that sometimes if the seller is also represented by the same brokerage, we just have to consent to a different arrangement. However, especially in designated, when we're designating you for them and the other person for the other side, it's very rare that someone says, oh, that doesn't sound good to me. More often than not, if there's going to be a question or a concern, it's when you personally are on both sides of the transaction. And I'll tell you the way I used to handle that. My script was, I completely understand the question around that, Mr. and Mrs. whichever side. Here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that I personally, do you trust me? Yes. Well, I personally know and trust the guy on the other side of the transaction. Get it? Because he's me, right? So if what you're saying is that you trust me, I can also tell you I trust the agent representing the seller. And since we're one and the same, what I can guarantee you is honesty and fair dealings, no hanky-panky, and full disclosure every step of the way. I don't think I one time ever had someone say that it doesn't sound right. It sounds like you're a crook. It sounds like it's a conflict of interest. And if for some reason that really is what they think, you can always go to somebody in the office and say, you know what, can you negotiate on behalf of this person so that, because they don't want to consent. But it happens very, very rarely. Number 4, once you've verified all the paperwork has been received, call the seller and inform them of the receipt of the offer. If possible, arrange a time to meet with them to discuss it, or over Zoom or over the phone, right? I do prefer that the seller have their own copy of the offer. So you're either bringing them one if you're meeting with them personally, or you're sending them one. Here's the thing about sending them one. If I receive the offer now at 5:43 and I shoot a text over to the sellers to say, hey, we've received an offer, I'd like to meet with you at 7 o'clock to review it. And they say, that's great, Zoom would be best for that this evening. And I say, great, let's Zoom at 7. I'm not sending them the offer right now at 5:40, 5:44. Because they don't have me to walk them through the offer for another hour and 15 minutes. So I am going to preemptively say to them, that's great, I will send you the details and the documentation that we're going to review about 5 or 10 minutes prior to our meeting. If you could watch for that, if you want to print that out or have it on a screen, whatever works for you. Don't send it to them and let an hour or 2 or 6 go by, because what do we know is real about a seller? Oftentimes they look at one thing, right? And if you're not there to help them understand the rest of the terms and what the price actually means and what the mortgage thing, they spend too much time stewing. And by the time you get on the Zoom at 7 o'clock, you have an uphill battle. So I'd rather you hold on to that and deliver it to them just moments before so that you're really going through it together, if that makes sense. Number 5, now you're actually on the Zoom call, right, with the seller at 7 o'clock. You're going to review the offer with the seller. Guys, I know some of this might sound a little dopey, but it's written this way for an absolute valid reason. So just stick with me. Review the offer with the seller. Do this in an upbeat and encouraging manner, no matter what the price or terms of the offer are. Remember, someone liked their home well enough to actually put pen to paper and decide they wanted to buy it. I cannot tell you how many times I either overhear or a story is told to me about something that failed to go together. And the discussion with the seller sounds kind of something like this. Hey, Margaret, how are you doing? Yeah, so did you see it? Man, oh man, it's like, I don't know what these people were thinking. You know, I completely understand if you're upset. You know, don't shoot the messenger. I'm all. Guys, how do you expect the sellers to respond if you're like Eeyore delivering the offer information? Like, nobody wants a downer. The good news is that, guess what? An hour and a half ago, we didn't have an offer, and now we do. So it doesn't matter what the numbers say. It doesn't matter what the terms are. This is a lesson in objective versus subjective. Your job is to remain objective throughout this conversation and deliver them facts. Because remember, I gave you your job description, right? Your job description is to interpret current conditions such that the client can make the best business decision possible. In this scenario, you're just interpreting the conditions of the offer so that they can make a great decision about how to move forward with it. This is not the place for an editorial. With all due respect, and I love each and every one of you like you were my own, whatever, your opinion doesn't matter. I'm sorry if that's offensive to some of you, but your opinion doesn't matter. You don't get paid to have an opinion. You get paid to help guide people through a process so that their opinion can be the best one and the best decision possible. So be really, really cautious around inserting your subjective opinions into this process, right? So it's always exciting. Instead, I have to call Margaret and say, hey, Margaret, how you doing? I'm so excited. This is what we live for, right? Your first offer. Hey, would it be okay if we went through the price and the terms? That would be awesome. Let's do it together. And I'm going to bring Margaret through a conversation around what this offer looks like. Guys, here's the other thing I want you to avoid. So Margaret, the offer is $550 with a mortgage, and they're closing in April. I think on the 2nd, it says the 2nd. There are some agents that think the price, what kind of financing, and the closing date that's the offer, and that's the discussion. I would offer something slightly different. And if it's all right with you, I'm going to read number 6 to you. So listen to how this sounds and outline what you think stands out. What do you think rocks about the way this is being delivered? What do you think is not so good about how it's being delivered? What surprises you? What are your ahas from it? So Margaret, the offer that we've received is an offer from Tom and Sally Smith. They are from Pennsylvania. They have 2 small kids and another one on the way. They will both be working down in White Plains once they make their move. They are opening negotiations on your home with an offer of $550,000. They will look to finance 80% of that with a mortgage, and we have a letter of pre-qualification from Fairfield County Bank for that amount. Their ability to obtain a mortgage will be a contingency in this contract. The other 20% will be in cash, 10% total at contract signing, and the other 10% brought to the closing table. They have asked for the following extra items to be included in the sale: the pool equipment, the lower level freezer, and the play set in the backyard. Their contract will also be contingent upon satisfactory inspections of both the house and septic systems, which also will include testing the well water and testing for radon in both the air and the water. They are asking for 7 days to get all of those inspections completed. They would like to have contracts signed and back to you within 14 days, and they've requested a June 30th closing date. So let's discuss. What are you thinking? Do you have any questions on what we just went through? How can I help you determine whether this offer makes sense for you? That's a whole lot different than $550 financing June 30th, right? So what are your thoughts on that? What did you like? What didn't you like? What were your ahas?
Well, it was much more thorough in terms of all the background and the details that you gave, who the people were and what they were going to be doing and all the different contingencies.
Yeah, let me ask this quick question. Does all that matter to a seller?
Yes.
So here's the answer. The answer is it depends. It depends on the seller, right? This process may have some sellers being like, okay, TikTok, can you hurry this up? Right? That's a little lengthy. And it may have some sellers saying, oh my goodness, Pennsylvania, do you know where in Pennsylvania they're from? My son and daughter-in-law live in Pennsylvania. Oh, we just love Pennsylvania, right? So it completely depends. But what we're asking you to do is err on the side of being a little bit more thorough. If the seller is uninterested in that stuff, they will just discount it in their head. If you don't deliver the information and point those things out and the seller is looking for it, well, then you've had an incomplete delivery of the offer. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, what I observed from how you presented the offer is you tell a story about the potential buyers with their kids and stuff. What I liked in your statement, and maybe, I don't know if that's steering or not, but you said it starts with, they want to open negotiations at 550, which is, I think, is a great statement, right? And then you tell even all the other conditions, but in a way that it sounds very normal. Like, oh yeah, they want to do inspections, by the way, you know, on the house and rate it and the well, da, 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 da. And, you know, they have a mortgage, they 80%, 10% up front and at closing. So I think it's presented very well, but I really like the story around it. And the fact that you said they want to open negotiations at 550.
Yeah, it's a really important point to underline, right? Because I will tell you that, again, unless the buyer's agent has come to you and said, look, they're putting their best foot forward right out of the gate. So this is the offer. And then I would simply say that, right? I've been informed that the offer kind of to start and to finish is $550,000, right? But oftentimes, or more often than not, and again, in the weird kind of bizarro world that we're living in right now, this may be less relevant. And yet the idea of helping people understand, because when you say opening negotiations, it helps them understand that there may be more. And so even if the number isn't where they want it to be, right, guys, that's kind of our job, right? We present what was presented, we get their feedback, and then we go back and see what else might be available, right? That's the discussion between the agents to maneuver the price and the terms. So I love that you caught that. Anything else that anybody caught or wanted to make mention of?
I'd love to toss in, the whole thing sounded negotiable. And I don't think we always present things that way to our clients. Every element, other than they have so many kids and one's on the way. I mean, it was like, all of these are options that we could tweak. Do you want to get the playset? Don't you want to get the playset? And I just love that feel, because I think we get too locked in on, well, it's this or that, black or white. These all sounded flexible.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
If I may add, Rick, I agree with everything that my colleague said. You stayed totally objective in how you presented it. But I did feel, if you would say that to me as a seller, my brains would start raging about thinking like, okay, that's all the consistency, and that's and that's the inspection. If something's wrong with my house, I might. So it triggers a thought process that, okay, I need to prepare for negotiations.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if at any point you say or do something with your seller client or your buyer client that triggers them thinking and participating in the process, you're doing it 1,000% right. That's the idea, right? Again, I said before, if you're just doing everything for them, you run the risk of leaving them behind, and you're not now on the same page. If we're doing this together as we're building and doing things in partnership, that's how you get people from point A to point B. Even if at point A, they're completely like, I don't want these people, 550 is an insult, it's horrible, and I don't care if she has 2 children and another one, I don't care, right? Objectively, right, we just get to walk it through, right? And the reality, I thought Skye made a really interesting comment in that the whole thing sounded negotiable. When you think about an offer coming to a seller, most of it is, right? And so if we're doing the job of helping them understand, guys, sellers make really good decisions when they feel like they have the power, right? Here's a small hint. Buyers make really good decisions when they think they have the power, which is why if you'll turn the page, it's someplace coming up. We may have to skip. I want to just talk about ARM real quick. We've got 4 minutes. ARM is accept, reject, modify, right? Accept, reject, modify. And we're always going to remind the seller that they have three options. They can either say yes or say no, or come up with something different and see if we can get agreement on something different. That's accept, reject, modify. And so one of the things that I have learned over my career is always remind your seller every step of the way that they have arm, because now they believe they are in control, right? Let me ask this quick question. Who ultimately has more control, the buyer or the seller?
Both.
Seller.
The seller, it's their property.
Yeah, no, the seller, I believe.
I don't know, I was thinking the buyer because, I don't know.
Agents.
Somebody said both. I think Elena said both.
Yep.
Why did you say both?
Because buyers can also use the arm and walk away.
You got it, right? So I don't ask many trick questions, but this one was the trick question, right? Elena beat you all. And so here's the reality. The person who has the most power in a negotiation, I believe, is the person I'm representing, because I'm going to always remind them that they have arm, that they can accept, reject, or modify. And so if you're doing that with your client always feels like they're in control and they make better decisions. I promise you that if you will make that one small change in how you talk with your clients, and every single time something comes back, even if you're in a back and forth negotiation, right? Maybe something comes back for the 6th or 7th time, and I'm going back to Georgia with another counter. I'm going to remind her. So Georgia, let's go through what's come back from the sellers or from the buyers, whomever, right? I just want to remind you, right? You're always armed with arm, right? So accept, reject, or modify. Here's the data. Which would you like to do? Accept, reject, or modify? Georgia may get sick and tired of me saying, oh my goodness, it's like, Rick, I know I have arm already. Why do you keep reminding me? I'll tell you, there's a reason. I keep reminding her because every time I say it, she feels more powerful. And having powerful clients who feel like they're in control of the situation just creates better decisions being made by those clients. Because they're not making decisions out of fear, and they're not making decisions. If Georgia was my buyer and I didn't tell her that she was in control each time, she could very well be feeling like, oh my goodness, like these sellers that they just don't say yes to anything I say, right? When do I get to take a stand? Instead of me telling Georgia every single time, you can take a stand now if you choose, or now, or now, or now. She's like, damn straight I can. I maybe choose not to, but I can if I want to. It's a different mindset that you help your clients move into. And it's a better mindset for creating agreement, right? All right, guys. So we got through page 1 of the Anatomy of a Seller Transaction. So that's better than nothing. We will finish that tomorrow, starting right at 4. We'll dive right in. Do be on time so they don't miss any of the fun. And as I said, about halfway through tomorrow, we will pivot and start down the path of buyers. I hope you had a great session. I hope this was helpful. I hope you take something away and implement it. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy your dinner. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock on our 9 a.m. Zoom. I think I'm lined up for some stats tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So I will see you tomorrow at 9. Have a great evening. Take care.
Rick,
Yes, sir.
I got a quick question. When does Ignite Recycle, when does it come around? When do you start from the first session again? Is there a timeline for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I don't have an answer for that just yet. I can give you an approximate time frame.
Awesome.
So we will finish, let's see, so family reunion is next week. We will finish the week after. So we will finish either on Wednesday, the 24th or the 25th. That will probably then be, because we usually take a couple of weeks off in between. So I would say, again, generally speaking, mid-March, maybe the 3rd week of March, depending. It depends on my schedule. It depends on who needs it and what the scope of attendance is, scheduling with other issues. We do have risk reduction in early to mid-March. So probably what we'll do is get everyone through the risk reduction sessions that we'll do, and then start Ignite again. So I would plan on probably the third week of March for a new version.
Very well. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure thing.
One last question from me.
Yes, sir.
Do it tomorrow because I know we're out of time, but can you go over the itinerary for family reunion? I never got an email, saying, welcome to family reunion or any of that stuff. So I have no idea what's happening other than hearing from others that it starts on Monday.
Yeah,
I didn't get the email either.
Okay, so nobody did. Nobody got an email. It's because of how we registered you, right? It's because of how we registered you. If in fact you got one, it's because you were put in a certain position in the group registration, but most people did not get an actual registration email, which I'm just finding out in the last 24 to 48 hours. So if you ask to be registered, know that you are registered. Know that you will get the documentation on Thursday that will allow you to log into the portal. If you're looking for the agenda in the meantime, you can go to familyreunion.kw.com, familyreunion.kw.com, and click on agenda. It's all spelled out for you there. We just won't have access to the platform until Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Rick. This was a great informative session.
I'm glad. Guys, have a good night.
Thanks, Rick. Good night.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.